Hey, good afternoon. I'm Livia Kent. I'm the editor-in-chief of Psychotherapy Networker magazine, and I'm here, honored to be here, with Craig Malkin, who is the author of the internationally acclaimed book, Rethinking Narcissism: The Secret to Recognizing and Coping with Narcissists, which is a very, very popular subject these days. Craig is a clinical psychologist, lecturer for Harvard, and director of YM Psychotherapy and Consultation. He's been featured widely in the media, and recently Oprah Daily named Rethinking Narcissism one of the best books to read if you have a narcissist in your life. And we are offering a free download of this book at the URL. There we go, the URL at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to read a snippet and check it out. And Craig, we're here because I want to ask you specifically not what happens if you have a narcissist in your life, but what happens if you have a narcissist in your therapy practice. So we're not talking about the kind of grandiose narcissist you'd see on reality TV, because let's be honest, you probably aren't seeing one of those in your practice, because according to them, there's nothing wrong with them. They probably shouldn't be in therapy. But you may have a narcissist in your practice who may be slipping under your clinical radar. You may have a covert narcissist in your practice. And you wrote a wonderful article on covert narcissism in our March-April issue of Psychotherapy Networker magazine. I'll just give a very quick plug before I hand the mic to Craig. You can subscribe to the magazine using the QR code in the corner of your screen, or the URL that will flash at the bottom. This was a really popular issue. Craig, your article went gangbusters. So many people were interested in reading it, and I'm thrilled to be talking to you today. So let's get to it. What is a covert narcissist? How do you spot them in therapy? And why are they so vexing for us therapists?
Well, the answer brings all those questions together, really. Let's start with what narcissism is briefly, because that's the way you understand what covert narcissism is. Really, the core of narcissism, we know, is something called self-enhancement motives or self-enhancement in research. I translate into a pervasive universal human trait, the drive to feel special, exceptional, or unique compared to the other 8 billion people on the planet in some way. And in some way is what's key. Because the first narcissism that you described, which is often called overt narcissism, is really obvious, extroverted, loud. Everybody knows that. The grandiosity is apparent. In covert narcissism, outwardly, these are people who are shy, self-doubting, anxious, often socially withdrawn. Outside, they're apparently vulnerable. They seem to be in distress. Internally is where the grandiosity is, because the way they self-enhance is not positive qualities. They feel like the most misunderstood person in the room. They feel like often the ugliest or the one who suffers the most. So it's their pain that they feel makes them special, exceptionally unique compared to others. And the way we spot them when they come in, first of all, they are the ones who tend to come in. You alluded to that. We know from the research that people who are covert narcissists, also known as vulnerable narcissists or hypersensitive narcissism, I just call them introverted narcissists, they are the ones who pick up the phone or send out an email and say, I'm having difficulty. So the first thing that tips you off if you have some sense that narcissism is going on, if they come into therapy in the first place. Now, there are people who are grandiose who come in if they're a little bit lower down on the trait, a little bit lower down in the spectrum. But the problem that happens is, although somebody who's covertly narcissistic might contact you and say, my life is falling apart, like the person I described in the article I wrote for you, when they get into the room, you encounter all these problems, because in order to maintain that sense of feeling specially misunderstood or suffering, they kind of have to put up barriers, and they don't genuinely share the problems or feelings. So typical of this, the guy I wrote about, Jake, he comes in, he has a bunch of emails strewn about him, almost like a barrier between us, and he launches in immediately to start talking about it and reading from the emails. He's not looking at me, he doesn't say hello. This is so emblematic On the one hand, they say have problems. On the other hand, they put a barrier between you and accessing and helping with the problem.
I love the way you start this article with Jake. It's such a vivid description. And one line I like particularly, and where is it? You describe his emotions, the emotions he's putting out, as being like a symphony. Here it is. It was as if I was hearing a melancholy ballad, but the instruments were off key. So it's beautiful. I love those words, but tell me a little bit more about the off-keyness.
This is that problem of apparent vulnerability. So anybody who's extremely narcissistic is also insecurely attached, which means that they don't trust that when they have vulnerable states, when they're sad, scared, lonely, blue, they can turn to someone for mutual care, comfort, and support. So they don't actually directly express that vulnerability. So in covert narcissism, it feels more like showing than sharing. There's an angry insistence to covert narcissism. Notice Jake comes in and he throws the emails down, doesn't say hello. It's not relational, but it demands attention. And this is a way around that problem. If I don't trust that somebody's actually going to respond to me in a caring way or really listen to my feelings, I'm not going to directly share those feelings. But if I want the attention, I have to have some impact. So other examples are often somebody who's covertly narcissistic. They might come into the therapy room and they say a few words, but they just sit there and they're very brooding, or they bristle when you ask them questions. This is really typical. They're showing their state instead of talking to you about it directly.
So I can imagine this is vexing for therapists, but something you mentioned in the article that stood out for me is that these covert narcissists seem like the ideal clients. They seem so vulnerable and in need of help. So I think the question for me and the question for our audience, and by the way, if you're in our audience listening, give us a shout out. Tell us where you're from in the chat. Hi. Somebody's asking to share the article. The article you can find on our website. I'm not sure we have a card. It's in the March-April issue, and the article is free. You can read the whole thing for free. So if you go to our website, go to magazine issues, go to the one on narcissism, you'll be able to find the link to Craig's article. But so they're vexing, they're clinically vexing, they're hard to spot. Once you do spot it, the question at hand is, what do you do about it? How do you treat it? So you share 4 ways that you treat this in the therapy room. And before we get there, I just want to ask you, because I've heard other people say this, you can't treat narcissism. It's not treatable. It's just there. So what do you, I mean, clearly you disagree. So why don't we start there and get to the how?
Yeah, I absolutely disagree. My specialty is helping people with narcissistic personality disorder. I also help people who are struggling with someone in their life who has extreme narcissism. So I have helped people, and the starting point is if they're willing to admit to a problem. It gives you a leg up. Like Jake comes up, says, my life is falling apart. Obviously, there's a problem there that he's admitting to, an awfully large problem. But back to this idea of why it's vexing and it feeling like the emotion isn't quite genuine. So Jake was pretty sad in the first meeting, like really obviously distraught. But again, he wasn't connecting with me. And something about it didn't make me feel what he was feeling. And that's one of those clues, I think, to answer that question again that you want to come back to. Like, what are you feeling with this person? So the first step is you got to get away from the emails and the listing of all the problems. And so with Jake, for example, I simply invited him to focus inward. I say something to somebody in the room like, let's make a distinction between content and process. Content is all this stuff, the emails and the things that you say and do, the behaviors in the world, and process is what drives it. And if we want to help you change these problems, these behavior patterns that you're saying are getting in the way, we need to get to the stuff internally that's driving it. So let's just start by focusing inward, what you're feeling inside in your body, physically, emotionally. almost always people say sure. They might have a few questions, but they'll do it, particularly somebody like him who's in distress. And the starting point, I just have them focus on what's happening. And with him, he said, I feel a tightness in my stomach. This is anxiety. So this is the first step. If you want to actually create some real change around this, you have to first help somebody lower their anxiety. That's step one. Lots of ways to do it. With him, I just had him track the feelings. Okay, you've got this knot in your stomach. Let's just follow it, see what happens. Oh, it's starting to loosen up after a time. And now we've reduced anxiety. And the reason this is so important is anxiety triggers defenses. It triggers these unconscious strategies like showing instead of sharing. And as soon as we can start to get anxiety down, now you can soften the defenses. And we, then briefly we can get to the next step is distancing from the defense. In his case, I did it by asking him to trace the feeling back in time. Okay, so now you're okay, it's loosening up, you're feeling calm, great. Can you tell me if you are paying attention to that knot in your stomach, if you just take it back to when you first viscerally experienced in your life, without overthinking it, no pressure, no expectation, just what comes to mind, like what's the first memory? And with him, it was his mother standing over him in the kitchen while he cried. All right, so now we've got a memory to work with. Yeah, exactly. And, he'd lost his best friend. She's telling me he's selfish. She's not listening to him. And so he has to get to the point of having a tantrum and crying on the floor before she's finally paying attention. Now we've got the origin of the defense, but even better, it gives me an opportunity to go into it with him. We've distanced from the defense. Now we can do the real heart of the work, which is helping him really experience the feeling, creating an attachment security experience. Yeah. How do you feel towards this kid? Oh, I feel sad for him. How can you show that? And now he's relating in a way. As soon as somebody can start creating an emotional experience and relating in a securely attached way, their narcissism goes down. We know this from the research because you're getting the genuine feeling.
Yeah. One of the tools that you used, I noticed, was from AEDP, the betrayal, where you really had him go to that experience and feel it in it, and then you were there with him to help him be with that vulnerable little boy in a different way. It's really beautiful work.
Yeah, and then you get a chance to do it with him as he's actually feeling. I'm in the room with him. I can relate to him there. Now we're creating attachment security experience between us that he can take in and start to loosen some of the narcissistic defenses and actually feel and relate.
Yeah. But this is long-term work, I imagine.
Absolutely it is. Oh, absolutely it is. You can start to see some shifting in the course of a year because the first thing that happens is the client starts to become aware of their defenses, and that's so helpful. They start catching it. I was talking to my wife. I started to talk to her in this contemptuous way. I realized I wasn't actually sharing feelings or telling her what was going on. They can start saying things like that, which is so helpful.
So we don't get to it in the article, but I imagine that Jake would start to say these things to the girlfriend who he comes in, all knotted up about. She was doing all this stuff to him, and now he can see this as a relational way. Israel, how his defenses were playing a part in the anguish,
and maybe even ask for help. Instead of just brooding, for example.
Yeah, because you say something about the help. I underlined this because I really liked it. Interesting. Well, that's what I get for trying to refer to the article at the spur of the moment. So I see a lot of questions coming in from our audience, and at the end, I think we'll get to some questions. But as we wrap up, I just want to ask you about something that you mentioned in the article, something that I found really interesting that just keeps coming back to me, is this concept of healthy narcissism. Talk to me about healthy narcissism. You explicate this in the free download of your book that we're offering. So that will come up at the bottom of your screen right there. You can read more about it, but give us the short version of healthy narcissism and what this looks like.
So think of the drive to feel special, exceptional, or unique, that central trait that narcissism is about, that self-enhancing motive along a spectrum. And then you can start to think about how healthy narcissism is definitely established. There's 4 different measures, including ours, which is just called healthy narcissism. But the whole problem is people haven't figured out how to relate it to the larger concept of narcissism. I think this is the easiest way. We have this drive to feel special, and then think of a spectrum from 0 to 10. At 0, you have people who don't self-enhance at all, don't feel special at all. That comes with its own problems. And in the center is where you find, around 5 on the spectrum, is where you find healthy narcissism. And this is feeling a little special. It's not self-esteem, it's not self-confidence, it's not self-love. It is a slightly inflated view of self. And what we know is people who have this moderate self-enhancement around the world, there's cross-cultural research on this, who feel a little special. They're able to persist in the face of failure, give and receive in relationships. They agree with statements like ours in our self-report measure. I like to dream big, and obstacles don't slow me down. These are just some examples. So there's the protective benefit of feeling special enough to kind of stay on track and suffer like the winds of fate, the trials and tribulations of life, feeling intact without going so much to the extreme as we see in narcissistic personality disorder and extreme narcissism, where that need to maintain a sense of specialness trumps everything else, right? And everything else takes a backseat. Love, often genuine connection, caring, what matters is that feeling. In the center, it's flexible. So a great example is people who have moderate health self-enhancement, who have healthy narcissism. They will say that they're, say, better than the average person, maybe even the top 10%. Right? If you ask them on a measure, how do you compare in terms of your peers in intelligence or warmth? And I'm like at the top 10%. If you give them a test and it turns out that they're not, or they're low, and then you tell them, they'll say, oh gosh, I thought it was higher than that. Well, who knew? Maybe I need to work on it. Somebody who's extremely narcissistic, you give that same feedback to, they'll say, well, this test is stupid.
Yeah. And you've done something to me by even suggesting that I should have taken the test in the first place. Yeah.
This is ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about. They attacked the source. So healthy narcissism is about playing with what another researcher called Shelley Taylor called positive illusions, right? It's not really true that I'm special compared to all people in this way. That it feels good to nurture the feeling a little bit, but I can let it go if information tells me otherwise. I don't have to cling to it.
Yeah. One of our symposium keynoters, Shankar Vedantam, called it useful delusions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but flexibly held, loosely held, not clung to like a talisman.
Yep. I like that. So there is a healthy version of communal narcissism that you suggest, perhaps, that might really benefit therapists. And we Psychotherapy Networker is written by and for therapists. So I think, quickly in our last few minutes, what is communal narcissism, and why might therapists benefit from a healthy dose of it?
Communal narcissism is a newly emerging construct in the research. But again, there's lots of ways to feel special. People who are communal narcissists, who are well above average on the trait, feel that they're special by virtue of being helpful, altruistic. So they agree with statements like, I'm the most helpful person I know. So a healthy communal narcissism might be someone who feels just special enough to believe that they can actually really help people with like a lot of problems, who are suffering, maybe more than the average person. You have to have some belief in that a little bit to even step into the consulting room and try to do some of this from the start, even with all the self-doubts. The good news about healthy narcissism is it comes naturally when we're able to relate in a securely attached fashion, right? So keeping it in a healthy range means being able to be directly open and vulnerable and relational, all the things that we're taught to do. For somebody who's a therapist, if you have one of those days where, say, somebody with NPD comes into the room, and maybe this is what you're referring to earlier, part of their attachment, their investment, I should say, in feeling special means you can't help them, right? This is communal. This is, again, covert narcissism. So they put up barriers. They reject whatever the help is, right? Because if you're actually helpful, their problems aren't special at all, right? So this is one of the problems. So if you're facing that as a therapist, to just be able to hold on to that, okay, this is one of these days. I know this is something I'm good at. Also, I have a good sense of humor. I'm sure that came out too. So I would say that's in the range, being able to hold on to, I still have these qualities, even though I'm going through this, that's really helpful. And we could call that healthy communal narcissism. Maybe you're not that special on the day to think that you can continue to do this, but it's good to kind of believe you can.
Yeah. This is so much fun. You have so many insights, far more than we have time to hit on today or have hit on today. So I just want to make a final plug to read Craig's article in the March-April issue of our magazine. I believe that our host has posted the link to the article in the chat. You can also download a chapter of Craig's acclaimed book, Rethinking Narcissism, at the link at the bottom of your screen. You can learn more about healthy narcissism there. It's fun to read. You're a wonderful writer. I had so much fun working with you. And finally, dear audience, you can subscribe to Psychotherapy Networker magazine at the QR code at the top of your screen or the link at the bottom. We really hope that you keep joining us and reading and engaging with experts like Dr. Craig Malkin. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Livia. Thanks.